Okay, I see a couple more people joining. As you can see, this is Capital RX's 5 Ways to Improve Your PBM Procurement Process in 2025 webinar. I'm Justin Veneri, Director of Communications here at Capital RX, and I just want to thank you for joining. It's our pleasure to welcome you. Bridget Mulvena is going to be running the webinar today. A quick housekeeping item before we get started. We will send a replay around after this. We'll post that up on our Insights page as well, so you'll have access to that. And as most of you know, if you're following along with us online on LinkedIn or otherwise, we've been doing a lot of work lately, especially around what I'll just call like actionable, helpful content. So I have a quick shameless plug. Bridget's podcast episode last week. It's a nice complement to this webinar, we think. And we also think you're going to like this update to what Bridget did in 2024 when she did the last version of this, which was ways to improve your procurement process in 2024. The twist is Bridget's been here for over a year now, obviously. And, she's quote unquote been selling PBM, given her prior experience as a pharmacy program director. I think you're going to like the updates. So we have some new gut check questions, some new recommendations or suggestions. And long story short, we think you'll find a lot of value in this webinar. So I'm going to kick it over to Bridget now to get started. And go ahead. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you, Justin, and welcome everyone. As Justin said, I'm Bridget Mulvena, Vice President of Business Development here at Capital RX. And I'm excited today to talk to you a little bit about how the last year in this role has changed my perspective of the PBM industry and also some of the ways I think about PBM procurement. And I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I started in a pharmacy when I was very young. I have had pharmacy jobs throughout my entire career. And in my last role at a large senior living provider, I was responsible for not only developing pharmacy programs that helped seniors and the staff at that organization, but also in charge of administering the pharmacy benefit and managing all of the procurement functions for certain clinical areas, and also pharmacy and pharmacy benefits was a part of that. So my recommendations in 2024 were really focused more on my experience in that plan sponsor role, sitting in that plan sponsor seat. And what we're going to talk about today is really how some of the recommendations that I made in 2024 have evolved and changed over time, and what I've learned as from the inside of a PBM versus from what I thought coming from the outside of a PBM. So today we'll talk about some strategies to improve PBM procurement. If you attended last year, we have 5 standard recommendations that I've made and then one sort of bonus recommendation. I've updated the PBM gut check for 2025. And then at the end, we'll have Q&A. If you do have questions throughout this program, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. Justin and our marketing team will be monitoring that throughout. And then at the end, we'll have a really nice Q&A session. So I'll start off with our first tip. And this is something that this is one of the things that stayed constant for me, because I was a big believer in the longer you have to make a decision, especially when you have a group of people, your benefits committee, your fiduciary committee, working with brokers, consultants, actuaries, that all have to come together to make a huge decision, like putting out an RFP and moving to a new pharmacy benefits manager, that the best thing to do is to start that as early as possible. And so my recommendation is 6 to 12 months before the plan year starts, you should be planning and getting your PBM materials built and have your and have your PBM RFP released. And then work with your consultant to talk about how they're going to analyze that, what type of reporting they're going to bring to you. Consider in advance any of the contractual issues that you may need to address. what is the termination clause of your current contract? Is your contract going to end naturally at the end of the plan year and you don't have to worry about giving notice? That's a great scenario to be in, but most times there's a required notice period in contracts. And so you want to be aware of any of the contractual obligations that you have to your current vendor before you start approaching other vendors to submit RFP responses. And avoid December and January RFP releases. And the reason I say that is because plan sponsors, members, consultants, brokers, they're all working in December and January to get those final elements of the new plan year set up. You're finished with open enrollment. You're making sure everything is running the way it's supposed to for January 1. And then throughout January, you're dealing with any of the hangover. So obviously, if you've already started the process in November, then you're ahead of the game, but avoid that December, January timeframe, and it'll decrease the amount of stress that you have, and then it'll enable you to have enough time to get all of the elements of the RFP reviewed. Don't forget that you're going to have, that you have the time it takes the pharmacy benefits manager to respond to your RFP, and then you have to take the time it takes your consultant or actuary to analyze the RFP and compile that data. And then you have the time it takes for your internal team to review that compiled data and decide about when you're going to have finalists, if you're going to have people come in for finalist meetings. And then if you are actually planning on making a change, then the best case scenario is that you've made that decision a good 5 or 6 months before the beginning of your next plan year to give you ample time to do a smooth and effective implementation. The other thing I'll say is if your plan is smaller, you may be able to do this in a shorter window. But if your plan is large, you're going to want to even give yourself extra time because you don't want to get behind the curve and then get stuck in a position where you may not have a choice to move, even if moving was your ultimate goal. And I apologize for that little technical difficulty. So next, we're going to talk about something that is unpopular and that when I was a plan administrator was not something I would have considered. But as I've done this work more, I really believe that that deprioritizing member disruption is a very critical piece of getting an effective PBM procurement, because what we don't realize is that our current PBM partners are disrupting us every day. And minimizing disruption is important, but the purpose of a PBM RFP is to secure a partner that offers better cost savings, greater transparency, better overall service, more favorable contract terms, and a well-structured agreement can improve clinical outcomes with better formulary management and chronic disease state. And so often member disruption is overestimated in that the impact to the members might be greater than it actually ends up being, especially because many formularies have the same highly clinically appropriate drugs on, many PBMs, excuse me, have the same highly clinically appropriate drugs on their formularies. And so it's a matter of making a decision to make a change and communicating effectively with your members as the rationale for the change, making sure they have all of the information that they need to be adequately prepared for the change. If they need to change pharmacies, they need to know that. If their drug's not going to be on formulary, they need to know that. And so you want to find a partner that helps to do some of the heavy lifting there so that you don't have a lot of additional administrative and communication burden. Find a PBM partner that'll help do that for you. Make use of special programs around grandfathering or continuation of therapy and give members a little bit of extra time to get used to the change. That may help with disruption. And then emphasize for your group overall financial and clinical stability, because you want to make sure that everyone understands that we're not in it just to change you from pharmacy A to pharmacy B. It's not about the change as much as it is about the outcome and both financial outcomes for the plan and the members and financial outcome, clinical outcomes and health outcomes for the members and their families. And always make sure during these types of areas that you're analyzing high-risk areas that potentially can impact disruption the most, and that's specialty drugs, and ensure that your new PBM partner is going to accept the prior authorizations from the prior PBM, and you're not going to have to go through that process all over again for your members. Now, this one might be a little controversial, and I'm not saying that PBM coalition arrangements are bad. We actually are a part of several PBM coalition arrangements at Capital RX. And so we don't, it's not like we are saying not to do it, but I'm saying be wary of it. And the reason I'm saying be wary of it is because a lot of times coalition contracts don't necessarily align with a plan sponsor's specific needs and goals. Sometimes plan sponsors need tailored formularies. Sometimes they need better clinical programs. They want different pricing strategies. They want to be able to apply rebates at the point of sale and do innovative and novel things to help manage their spend and improve their member experience. And in a coalition arrangement, you're just a part of a large group that's all tied to the same contractual obligations. There might not be as much transparency on fees and rebates in these agreements. You might not have as much control to, say, I don't want to pay for this particular drug because I don't believe it has any use. And if it's on the formulary, it has to be there. You also don't want to lose flexibility in your ability to renegotiate your contract when the time comes. And you also want to make sure that you understand the long-term impacts of group negotiated terms. Always remember that if you're a part of a coalition, similar to being in a GPO arrangement, if you're buying pens and pencils from a GPO and you buy, X number of pens and pencils over a certain threshold, then you get into a better deal, right? But the GPO is keeping a portion of your spend for themselves, and that same thing exists for coalitions. And so you just want to make sure that you understand what's going on here and that you also know that any additional value that's going to the coalition is value that is not hitting a plan sponsor's bottom line. And in the same vein, I'm going to say, let's challenge our brokers and actuaries to think beyond the spreadsheet. And I'm going to go back to the example that I just used. As a former procurement director and a former pharmacy general manager where I was responsible for a lot of purchasing, I'll tell you that you can buy your pens and your paper and your needles and your syringes on a spreadsheet because those prices are stable. You can negotiate the same price for 3 years in a row, and that is a fairly good standard in the supply chain. But spreadsheet evaluations fail to address all of the nuances that exist in a good pharmacy benefits manager's offering. And so, yes, it's a great way to compare payment fee structures and rebate arrangements and things like that, but it doesn't account for total cost of care, clinical efficiency, the alignment that the PBM has with your organizational goals, the vast improvement in a member experience when you go to a PBM that's got a great member service center. And it also misses critical contractual nuances like rebate transparency and how a PBM manages specialty drugs, meaning like what is their prior authorization rate as it compares to their competition. And then also doesn't account for any lesser of logic type behavior that a PBM like Capital RX engages in. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what's going on, challenge these brokers, and ask a question like, hey, did you think about drug mix and refill thresholds when you were looking at the evaluation? Is this PBM formulary and is there just general practice going to significantly change our drug mix and save us money by bringing us to a lowest net cost? And do they have a mechanism in place, or are they willing to allow us to change the refill thresholds to avoid wasteful over dispensing, which leads to, potential issues with waste for the members, that they have medication left over that they need to destroy, and also waste in the plan where you're paying for excess fills that should not even be getting processed throughout the year. Assess rebate transparency and specialty drug strategies. Again, going to be a big point here today. Is your PBM passing through your rebates fully? And do they go beyond the rebates and provide you a report? And do they go beyond that report and pass through 100% of manufacturer revenue? So ask those questions. We're going to get into that in just a second. Focus on total cost rather than isolated metrics, right? So you can look at unit cost, which is the cost of the drug minus the rebate. You can look at dispensing fee. You can look at admin fee and buckets. But when you put that in an aggregate and then apply some of these other strategies there, you start to see an incremental reduction in your total pharmacy spend over time. And I shared this last year on the podcast, and on the webinar, and I will share it again as many times as the issue comes up, is that this is exactly the behavior I engaged in at Erickson Senior Living, and it's what allowed us to save 24% on plan spend in the first year, because we were willing to make some of these hard choices. We focused on total cost of care. And then obviously, as a plan, you've got your own clinical goals and you've got fiduciary duty. So make sure that what's happening with the spreadsheet evaluation aligns with what those goals are and what you believe your duty is, your fiduciary duty is to your members. Another one that's not popular, and that is break the addiction to rebates. As we see, 80+% of all drugs that are dispensed for any given plan are generic drugs, and generic drugs are not rebatable. That generally accounts for about 12 to 15% of a plan sponsor's spend. And so rebates have been used to offset that small percentage of use that has become a large percentage of spend. And yet there are generic alternatives for many of these drugs that have gotten preferred formulary placement on some PBM's formularies. And we really do need to be shifting to a more generic centric. And then as we get into as we are in the age of specialty drugs and biosimilars, adopt more of a biosimilar, adopt a full biosimilar strategy. Biosimilars are designed intrinsically to be biologically similar to the drug that they're replacing, not a generic. Sometimes they're interchangeable. Sometimes you need a new prescription, but still a really good low cost, especially if it's a low WAC option for plan sponsors and for members, and it saves both of the plan sponsor and the member money. You want to incentivize this through copay reductions. And so I'm a huge believer in, if generics are 80+% of your use and only 12 or 15% of your spend, then why not make all generic copays $0 and see if you can get that 80+% up a little bit and potentially save a little bit of money. The plan takes on a little bit more in the copay area, but these are really cheap drugs anyway. And you can incentivize folks to shift away from high cost brand drugs. And you can do the same with biosimilar drugs and even assign a slightly lower copay for those drugs than they would get if, say, they were in a higher cost specialty drug. So that's something to think about. When we talk about rebates, I think we need to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. And that is that there is language in the Inflation Reduction Act that says that a manufacturer's price can't raise faster than its rebates. And so what we think is going to happen over time is that rebate dollars are going to start to come down. and prices may come down a little bit, but that the rebates will drop a little faster than the prices. And so we want to be really careful to pay attention to what's happening in the market there and make sure that you're not being overly impacted by buying too many expensive drugs and depending on a rebate. We often say that for every dollar you get back in rebates, you need to spend about $2.50 in drug spend to get there. And it becomes a little bit of a balancing act and almost not worth it. Um, Instead of thinking about that $1 million check that comes every quarter, think about your clinical management strategies and what your priorities are there, and make sure that the drugs that are on formulary and that you're preferring are not those that are highly rebatable, but those that are highly clinically appropriate. And then obviously focus on that lowest net cost, as I said before. Nobody wants to chase rebates. It's always fun to find them, never fun to chase them. And this bonus tip, and this is probably not going to be a surprise for folks, but avoid the status quo. And, staying with your current PBM provider might feel like the comfortable and right thing to do during the procurement process. It is the easy button, right? But if your incumbent comes in during a PBM procurement process with much larger rebates or better pricing or more services that they haven't been talking to you about all along, you should ask yourself, if this is possible now, why hasn't this been happening throughout the entire term of my contract? Because you want to be with the PBM that when the PBM gets better rebates, those get passed to you. You don't have to wait until the next contract to get the good rebates. And I'll borrow a phrase from one of my favorite gurus, and that's Brene Brown. Choose courage over comfort and make a move. Larger PBMs might have the edge on the spreadsheet and promise significant savings, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've been through 2 major procurements where we stayed with the incumbent, and I didn't see the savings that they promised. In fact, what I saw was 12, 14, 16% increases in one contract term. And then in the next one, 14, 18, 12% contract increases year over year. And if you move to a more strategically aligned, transparent PBM, then what you might see is a dramatic shift in year 1, as I shared before, 24% in our case, and then a slight shift, another 12% down in year 2. And then it takes a lot of years for you to get back to where you were just in the previous plan year before you change. And so think about where you are now and where you'd like to be in 5 years. And if you want to be on that plus 14, plus 16, plus 18, then obviously stay. But if you want to go back down and maybe even be flat 4 years from now, then it's probably time to make a change. I think you need to seek bold changes for long-term sustainability. And you need to evaluate advice from your brokers critically. Whether right, wrong, or indifferent, is the responsibility of the plan sponsor to certify and attest that there are no gag clauses in your contracts. But you need to make sure that your brokers are really helping you and working with you and holding your current PBM and other partners accountable, and make sure you're getting the best possible advice available in the marketplace from any broker or actuary that you're working with. So I'm going to take a quick breath. I'm going to take a breath. I talked really fast. And so every year I try to think about what's going on in the industry, and I think about this gut check. It's something that I used to do with my team. Here's a gut check. What's important to us as an organization? What's important to us as a plan? What do we think is important to our members? And so what are the things we need to check our guts with? Do we need to do something differently? And so first, are you contractually protected against hidden cost inflation? So there is, where there is spread, PBM spread, AWP spread pricing, however you want to talk about it, PBMs that use MAC lists, they're spread in a couple of different places. There is a opportunity for hidden cost inflation. And so you want to be with a partner that reduces that for you both contractually and then in actuality? Does your PBM partner align with your values and your long-term strategy? You want to find a PBM partner whose values align with yours, but also who understands your long-term strategy. Today, you might be looking for cost savings, but in 5 years, you might want pharmacogenetics or better management of GLP-1s, a number of things that you want to be able to track. You may want to, at some point, see all of your medical and pharmacy claims in one system. Are you with a partner who is headed there? Does your PBM prioritize profit, or are they appropriately focused on clinical outcomes and member health? And you, at Capital RX, I'll just say one of the things that's great about us is that we only make profit from a fair and flat administrative fee. That is the only profit that we make. We are 100% pass through. And I would challenge people to find partners that are pass through and who can attest to and then demonstrate through audits that they're not making any additional profit, that they're only profiting from the administration of claims, which is the fiduciary duty of a PBM. Do you have full visibility into drug pricing and claims data? Have you had to ask multiple times for it? When you asked for it, did you get it? When you got it, was it in the right format? And so look out for what you see in these in claims data files. Make sure there's an NDC there. Make sure you're able to see the price. Make sure you're able to see what you paid, what the member paid. You want to be able to see the full picture, and you want access to that. And you don't want it to be an argument or a back and forth conversation. It should be, I'd like a copy of my data. And the answer should be yes, how soon, and how much do you want? And then again, this is kind of, I already talked about this a little bit, but how does your PBM partner generate revenue? If they're making money on you spending more on more expensive drugs, then there is an alignment issue that needs to be reviewed there. They are not aligned with your goals, because your goals as fiduciary are to save as much money as you can for the plan and to provide the highest service you can to members, and making sure all the while that you're compliant while you do it. So with that, 27 minutes and 53 seconds. I will turn it over to Justin, and we'll start the Q&A.
Hey, thank you, Bridget. So we have a couple questions, and if you do have a question that you'd like Bridget to tackle, feel free to throw it in the little Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll see that, and we'll try to get to it expediently. So the first one is, you mentioned fiduciary duty, and I've heard the term fiduciary PBM out there. Can you share your thoughts on this characterization, and does Capital RX act as a fiduciary for clients?
Yeah, so a PBM can't assume fiduciary responsibility for a plan sponsor, right? And one of my colleagues, brilliant person, Josh Golden, said this in a meeting one day, and it has stuck in my head ever since. You cannot have two fiduciaries making decisions, because what happens if they don't agree? Whose decision stands? Whose decision stands in a court of law? And so as a plan sponsor, it is your fiduciary duty to make these decisions. And a PBM like Capital RX, we will accept fiduciary responsibility for what our job is, which is to administer claims. And then if there are things that you delegate to us, we are certainly happy to walk alongside you and hold your hand and help you make better decisions. But as a pharmacy benefits administrator, we want to administer your claims, and we want to do a really good job of that. And you make decisions about what's best for your plan and your people.
That makes sense. And then this is a good question on deprioritizing member disruption. How do you do that without frustrating or alienating members?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a little bit about that, and that is employ the continuation of therapy program or grandfathering. I'll share what we did at the senior living organization. I said the name before. Erickson Senior Living is, in the first year, we decided we were going to make this wholesale plan change, but we grandfathered every single user who was currently on a specialty medication for a full year, and we still cut costs 25%. So I'll also share that that was before Ozempic and Mounjaro blew up. So it might not have looked like that in the GLP-1 world where those are so popular, but but you can still have significant savings. I would also say look at the way you set up your copays and you get a chance to change your plan design every year during open enrollment. Consistently look at those copays. If you're constantly raising premiums and constantly raising copays, you are disrupting your members, and also think about the fact that your existing PBM is disrupting your members. They're kicking pharmacies out of the network, disruptive. They're adding and removing things from their formulary. That's disruptive. They're up tiering and drugs that used to be on tier one, now they're tier two or tier three. That's disruptive. And so disruption exists today. The biggest difference is with that kind of disruption versus changing plans in a plan, changing PBMs in a plan year, is that you don't get a new card. And so if the new card is the barrier, then, I would refer everybody to the Never Move Again webinar.
So we have a good question on the coalitions from Danny, so thank you. And I got your full disclosure too. But you're right, I believe Capital X is a participant in a coalition arrangement. Do you have any comment on if that presents a conflict of interest for Capital X and clients based on your previous comments?
No, it doesn't present a conflict of interest because my recommendation on coalitions is not stay away from them because they're the devil. It's be wary of them if you've got goals that are specific to your organization that you need to meet because you're basically signing a group contract. And when you're a party to a group contract, you don't have control. So I don't think that the Capital RX is part of different coalitions. We're happy to be a part of those coalitions. We've got great partnerships because of that. That was more about during procurement. Just because you're small doesn't mean you have to be in a coalition. Just because, and there are ways to get lowest net cost without having to join something like that. And also, look, a lot of coalitions do a great job, but at the end of the day, it's a middleman to the middleman.
Okay. Um, Big picture question. This is a good one. Thank you, Danielle. What is the difference between a PBM and PBA?
Well, so a pharmacy benefits manager takes control of your entire pharmacy benefits management program, right? So we administer claims, we do the PA, it's our formulary, it's our call center. For PBA in our model, we will help with those things if you want them, but we're just administering the claims at that point. We're all of the other decisions, the formulary, the the prior authorizations and that type of stuff are run. Typically, large health plans kind of do it this way. And those are all the different functions, the thousand little decisions that we make as a PBM, we no longer make as a PBA. We are just a platform. And then any other services that we provide, like our call center or anything like that, that you want to plug in, then that can be used as well. That's the simplest way for me to describe that.
And then question from Charles here in your comments regarding the addiction to rebates. What is your comment regarding those PBMs who claim that quote unquote lowest net cost can include brand drug cost with rebates compared to generic drug costs?
I think that's true. And I'm not going to tell you that it's not. I mean, even at Capital RX, I'll pick on Humira. I love picking on Humira. And so Humira right now, net of rebates, is in line with what the low WAC biosimilars are. And so what I say is that I think the better approach is have it, you have it on your formulary, but when you get an order for it, do an appropriate prior authorization process and don't approve them just because it's on the formulary. I think that's really the key here. And then, go all in on biosimilars because at the end of the day, if you've got five Humira claims, but 50 of the low WAC biosimilar claims, your total all-in net cost is going to be lower. and you go all in on the Stellara that's coming up. And we've seen this already play out once with Lantus and Semglee. So it's just because that's, Lantus is just one in a sea of drugs, right? And isn't like blockbuster status because it never really was in the relative scheme of things all that expensive. But that's been one of the most successful biosimilar transitions we've seen. And I think that we can continue to see success if that addiction to rebates is broken.
Okay. And then a couple of more clinical questions, which are good ones. Paul asks, should plan sponsors be requesting and reviewing PA or ST step therapy, I think, protocols as part of the RFP process?
Well, if you can get it, that's great. I think a lot of that stuff is proprietary. I think the better question to ask during the RFP process is, does your prior authorization process follow FDA protocols? And is AI auto approving prior authorizations because of formulary status? So if you want to see the protocols, I would say that most PBMs, maybe all PBMs are following FDA guidelines. It's just about what in their back end process enables that claim to go through faster or go through without clinical intervention.
I think sometimes it suggests or like review the approval data for the prior period to just see what
That
more.
Yeah, that's good too. Ask the PBMs, like what was your prior authorization approval rate in the last 18 months? Because drug mix and utilization patterns change over time. We haven't since 2021, that has never been more obvious with GLP-1s.
Uh, how do I evaluate medication therapy management, polypharmacy, et cetera? And how about genetic testing prior to administration of chemo drugs from Santiago? Thank you for the question.
Well, that's complex. Very hard to evaluate those things because when you're talking about a PBM process, you're looking at the entire universe of what you're talking about. And if you want, if you're a plan sponsor and you want to implement PGX, I would do all of it. You just bite the bullet, spend the money, get it all done, get everybody tested, get that logged into a system so that then you never have to worry about formularies again, right? Because every single person has their own unique formulary. Because if I'm on a statin, but Lipitor doesn't work for me because my genetic makeup says it doesn't, then Crestor might be the right drug. And so I think PGX is kind of one of those where you have to decide, am I all in? Because you can't just dip a toe there and expect to have any impact. For some of the other, with anti-neoplastics and stuff like that, I think one of the ways that I've seen really work is a split fill program, is evaluate whether or not your pharmacy benefits manager will allow you to do a 14-day supply and then split that copay because those drugs change so frequently. You want to be able to minimize the financial disruption to the member, understanding that they have got this life-threatening, frightening diagnosis, and let's get them in the drug that is prescribed now, see if they're stable on it, and if they need it to continue on that, great, we'll help them do that. But if they're going to change again, at least they're not out of pocket and we haven't wasted 14 days of an anti-neoplastic, could be $15,000. And so you want to make sure that you're not overspending and generating waste when there's opportunities to save there. And then what was the other point, Justin? I remembered those two, but you can't ask a menopausal woman three-part questions.
Stop it. um, um, forgive me. I think it was PGX and um,
Cancer.
yeah, and for cancer as well. So
Okay, so we got that. If we missed any part of that, put it in the notes, and apologies, because I've joked with that. I joke about that all the time. Yeah, I'm getting too old to be asked three-part questions. I can do two-part questions.
noted. Can you um, so another question came in regarding experience with employees and disruption. Um, this listener has experience with employers who are disgruntled with the member service associated with the utilization, um, management disruption, like new program or something, most likely prior authorization or otherwise, I would think, from the big three or traditional PBM model, and how those are handled typically. what do we do better or different from the big three in that area to minimize member disruption?
Well, so that's gonna be a multi-part answer. So first, we standardly employ a 90-day continuation of therapy program. So the first 90 days under service with Capital RX, you will not see any disruption. You still get the same drugs, everything still works. And about 30 days in, we start notifying members of what's going to happen. And so we give them a full 60 days to get new prescriptions and get used to the idea. We also have a best in class, best in PBM industry, and we won a Stevie Award in 2024 for this. So I'm not just saying that because I'm bragging, I'm saying it because it's true. The best call center. So you want to have access to what we do better is we've got a group of people who are dedicated to answering calls for all of our members at Capital RX. If you are a client, you get a dedicated phone number that goes directly to our call center so they know who's calling. They know when the call comes in that they're calling from Plan XYZ. And then they're able to better service those members and then work with them and have clinical, sometimes non-clinical conversations about why a certain drug might be better for them, both clinically and financially. And then we'll help the members understand that throughout the process. Average time to answer to get into us is about 14 seconds. Average speed to get to a pharmacist if you need to talk to one after that is about 5. And we've got the highest net promoter scores in the industry with 84 for members and 91 for clients. So we are not only do we claim we do it better, it's demonstrated and the scores show it. And we have a survey after every call that you can opt in or opt out of. And so the fact that folks actually fill out those surveys is good. And we actually even track internally positive feedback for our members. So the other thing too is we're not trying to rush them off the phone. At Capital RX and in the call center, it's not a KPI, a key performance indicator for our folks to only talk on the phone for a minute or 2 minutes. It's more, they are more their performance is more tied to first call resolution and member satisfaction than anything else. And I think that attributes a lot to why we feel like we do it better. Did that answer the whole question?
I think so. I mean, in general, prior authorization is one of those things where communication helps. So if you can speak to somebody and understand what's going on, could
Yeah,
probably resolve the issue or speed up the process. So
thanks for saying that, Justin, because you just reminded me about something else. We have at Capital RX, the other thing that makes us unique and special and wonderful is we have our own homegrown cloud native claims administration program called Judi, short for adjudication. And Judi enables the prior authorization process to be completed in an average of 3 days versus the industry standard of 7 to 10. And that extra 7 days, 5 to 7 days that they're having to wait for their medication is a huge contributor to member dissatisfaction. So that's another thing that we do well. And we do it well because we have the technology that makes us efficient and all of the thousand little things that a PBM has to do every day, all of that is housed in one system. And so our team members aren't frustrated having to go to 6 or 7 disparate systems to get the information that they need and to get the answers that they need.
got it. And one more from Robbie, and I've got another question after this. So keep them coming if you'd like. We've got some more time. Can you explain Capital RX's relationship with GPOs that have been created amongst the big three PBMs in the industry?
So Capital RX has a strategic alliance with Prime Therapeutics. It was announced last March. Prime Therapeutics is they have invested in our organization. They have a board seat. There is no ownership stake. It is just a strategic alliance. And as a part of that strategic alliance, they're going to be leveraging Judi technology for themselves. And we are leveraging and accessing our rebates through Prime's arrangement with Ascent. And the only way that we can truly compete against the big three is to have better rebates, because even though I personally believe you shouldn't chase them, the industry hasn't gotten there yet. And so we have entered into that alliance. That is our understanding now. And so whatever, we don't know what the percentages are, but I know it's a small single digit percentage that's retained by those two organizations. And then everything that comes to us then gets sent out to our clients based on your utilization.
And I think one of the things about Never Move Again that's interesting and unique is if you want to, you could potentially plug and play that as part of the network module of it. So there is the flexibility to put it out to bid.
Yeah, if you
It's
decide that you don't want to go that route, you want to be even more transparent, you can take us completely. We'll prove to you we don't want your rebate dollars. Take us out of the process 100%. Negotiate your rebates directly based on your utilization patterns, and we'll be out of it. And then you can get paid directly, and we don't ever have to even be involved in that arrangement, because rebates really aren't, I mean, they're a part of what we have to do to live in this space today, but they're not the future of pharmacy benefits management.
And then one more on the Inflation Reduction Act is interesting. What strategic adjustments should we be making now to stay ahead of the industry shifts you mentioned?
I'd say go all in on generics and biosimilars. I think that if the drugs that are going to be more heavily impacted by this are branded and specialty drugs. So brand drugs have higher rebates. Specialty drugs have extraordinarily high rebates. They're not all the same. And But generic drugs and biosimilar drugs don't have rebates associated with them. And so there's no incentive to drive bad behavior. And if you have if you're one of those plan sponsors that has a strong PGX program, and you look at what the recommendations are, most of the time a generic or a biosimilar drug is going to be more appropriate for folks than some of the more expensive therapies. So I think that it's about just kind of letting go of the need to get that rebate check every quarter and moving towards a more generic and biosimilar approach. And then I am a huge fan of $0 generic programs. I call it generous generics. I recommend as many plan sponsors as possible adopt generous generics. I would say, look, not everybody likes Kaiser's HMO model, but Kaiser's generic drug utilization rate is like in the high 80s, low 90s, and they've got the best outcomes in the industry. There's a reason for that. So just be mindful of that. And who knows, with the current administration, some of the more stringent covenants of the IRA may get rolled back. So I don't know that we have to immediately worry about it, but I just think the awareness that it's there and what it says about drug prices and rebates and the rate at which they can move is critically important to understand.
Got it. And that looks like it, Bridget. So we appreciate everybody sticking with us. Again, we'll put the replay out. Um, any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you all for coming and giving us the opportunity to talk to you today about this. As you can see, we are all very passionate about the pharmacy benefits industry and myself, pharmacy in general. So we hope that you found this informative, and we hope to see you next time.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.